The morning he told me we were going on a weekend trip, I actually felt relieved. That's the part that still gets me. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't even mildly curious about why he'd suddenly decided to plan something romantic after 18 months of working late and coming home smelling like takeout and stress. I was just relieved. I thought maybe we were finally turning a corner. We'd been married for 4 years, long enough that I knew the way he tapped the steering wheel when he was nervous, long enough that I could tell the difference between the silence that meant he was tired and the silence that meant something was wrong. But I had been so busy convincing myself that our problems were normal, that every marriage had rough patches, that I had stopped paying attention to which kind of silence we were sitting in. He told me on a Tuesday night. We were eating dinner, the kind of quiet dinner where the TV fills in all the spaces neither of us bothers to fill ourselves, and he just put his fork down and said, "I found a cabin. Near the Blue Ridge. I thought we could drive up Friday, come back Sunday." I looked at him across the table and I remember thinking, there he is. The man I married. The one who used to plan things without me asking. Who used to think about what I might need before I knew I needed it. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I should have asked more questions. Friday came and we loaded the car before sunrise. He was quiet, but I told myself it was the early hour. He hadn't slept well. I knew because I'd felt him move beside me at 2 in the morning, then at 3. Then I'd finally given up and watched the ceiling until the alarm went off. I asked him if he was okay. He said he was fine. He said he was just tired. We drove for almost 2 hours before I noticed we weren't going toward the mountains anymore. I had the Maps app open on my phone, half watching the little blue dot move through familiar highways, and then suddenly the route didn't look right. The highway we were on should have curved north, but we were curving west, into the kind of landscape that wasn't mountains so much as long empty stretches of road with tree lines on either side and nothing else. "Where are we going?" I asked. He said, "I'm taking a different route, less traffic." That made sense. I put my phone down. We drove another 40 minutes before he pulled off onto a road I had never seen. Gravel and uneven, the kind of road that only exists because someone decided it needed to exist and nobody else ever questioned it. The trees got thicker. The light changed. I put my phone back out and realized I had no signal. He stopped the car. Not at a cabin, not at a trailhead, not at anything. Just stopped on the side of a gravel road in the middle of trees I didn't recognize and said, "I need to get something out of the trunk." I waited. I heard the trunk open. I heard him moving around back there, and then I heard the trunk close, and I heard footsteps, and I thought he was coming back around to the driver's side. But the footsteps didn't come to the driver's side. They went away from the car. I turned around. He was walking down the road, away from me. His hands were in his jacket pockets and he was walking like someone walking to check a mailbox. Casual, unhurried, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "What are you doing?" I called out. He didn't answer. "Hey, what are you doing? Where are you going?" He kept walking, and then he reached a curve in the road and he went around it and he was gone. I sat there for a moment. Just sat there, completely still, because my brain was doing that thing it does when something happens that it cannot categorize. It just stalls, cycling through possibilities, finding none of them adequate. Then I got out of the car. I walked around to the back. The trunk was empty. Whatever he'd been getting out wasn't something he brought with him. There was nothing back there except the emergency kit that had been there since I put it there 2 Christmases ago. My phone had no signal. I walked in the direction he'd gone. Around the curve there was nothing. Just more road, longer and straighter, and no sign of him anywhere. He wasn't running. He had just walked around that curve and disappeared. I went back to the car. I tried starting it. He had taken the keys. I stood on that gravel road for what felt like an hour but was probably 15 minutes, and I did the only thing I could think of. I started walking toward what looked like a break in the trees about a 1/4 mile back, where I thought I'd seen a faded green road sign. If there was a sign, there might be a road. If there was a road, maybe there was something else. I made it about halfway to the sign before my phone found a single bar. I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed 911. The call dropped twice before it connected. I was in the middle of explaining where I was, trying to describe a road I didn't know the name of, trees I didn't recognize, a sky that looked exactly like every other piece of sky, when my phone screen lit up with an incoming call. It was from a number I didn't know, a local area code. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me switch over. Is this? And the woman on the line read out my full name, slowly, like she was reading from a document. I said yes. This is Sergeant Dunleavy with the County Sheriff's Department, she said. Ma'am, I'm sorry to be contacting you this way. I'm calling because your husband has been identified at the scene of an accident on Route 211. I need to let you know he did not survive. The trees didn't move. The air didn't change. But I remember the ground felt suddenly very far away from my feet, like someone had quietly rearranged gravity while I wasn't watching. I'm sorry, I said. What? She told me again, more slowly. An accident on Route 211. A vehicle had gone through a guardrail. They had found his wallet, his ID. They were asking me to come in for a formal identification. I stood on that gravel road, abandoned by him in the middle of nowhere, no car, no keys, barely one bar of signal, and was told that my husband was dead. There are things I still cannot explain about that morning. How he got from a gravel road in the woods to Route 211, how long he had planned this, how carefully he must have arranged it. The second car that I found out about weeks later, the one registered to an address I had never heard of, driven by a woman whose name I would soon learn to hate. But that came later. First there was just the road and the silence, and a stranger's voice on my phone telling me something I could not yet hold. A passing truck driver found me. A man named Terrell, who was running a delivery route and had turned down the wrong road trying to avoid construction, who saw a woman standing alone in the trees with her arms wrapped around herself and stopped without being asked. He drove me to the sheriff's station. He didn't ask me a single question. He just drove. My mother-in-law arrived at the sheriff's station before I did. I don't know how she knew. The officer who met me at the door said she had called them, that she had been listed as an emergency contact apparently, which was news to me because I was his wife, and the last time I checked, I was the emergency contact. She was already inside when I walked in, already talking to someone with authority, already turned around to look at me when I came through the door with an expression on her face that I can only describe as organized. She cried, but she cried at the right moments and stopped at the right moments. She held my hands when it seemed like the appropriate gesture, and she let go exactly when it stopped being appropriate. In the days immediately after, when I was mostly moving through rooms in a fog and eating things people put in front of me, she was present in our home, my home, the house I had helped pick out and helped furnish and helped pay for over 4 years of marriage. And at some point, her presence stopped being support and became something else. I first noticed it with the filing cabinet. My husband had kept a filing cabinet in the second bedroom we used as a home office. I had never paid much attention to it. He handled the finances, a division I had agreed to early in the marriage and never thought much about. The week after the accident, I walked into the office and the cabinet was gone. Just gone. The spot where it had been showed a clean rectangle on the carpet, a little lighter than the surrounding area, like a ghost shape. I asked my mother-in-law where it was. She said she had moved it into storage. For safekeeping, she said, while things were being sorted. Sorted by who? I asked. By the family, she said, like I was not a member of it. I hired an attorney 4 days after the funeral. Her name was Vasquez. She was known for estate litigation, and she had the specific kind of calm that comes from spending years in rooms where people are trying to take things from one another. When I described what had been happening, the filing cabinet, the comments about the house, my mother-in-law's references to what my husband would have wanted, she didn't look surprised. "Do you have a copy of the will?" she asked. I said I didn't. I hadn't known there was a will. We had talked about doing one together and never gotten around to it, or so I had thought. She found it. My husband had updated his will 11 months earlier. It left the house to his mother. I read that line 3 times. Then I set the document down on my attorney's desk, and I looked at the wall and I thought about the cabinet in storage and the expression on my mother-in-law's face when I walked into the sheriff's station and how she had been the emergency contact. 11 months ago. I tried to remember what 11 months ago looked like. It was autumn. He had been working a project outside the city that kept him away Monday through Wednesday most weeks. I had been picking up extra shifts at work because we were saving for a renovation on the kitchen. We had been on autopilot, the way couples get sometimes, running parallel lives that intersected at dinner and on weekends and then split apart again. I had not known. Vasquez told me something my mother-in-law was apparently counting on me not knowing. In our state, as a surviving spouse, I had specific legal protections. A will doesn't simply erase a marriage. There are elective share provisions. There are homestead rights. The house we had lived in together, that I had contributed to financially, that bore both our names on the mortgage, that could not simply be handed to someone else because a document said so. She knows this, Vasquez said, or her own attorney does. What they're banking on is that you won't. My mother-in-law came to the house 2 days later with a man I had never seen, whom she introduced as a family friend helping to go through some things. He was carrying a cardboard box. They walked past me in my own kitchen. I called Vasquez while they were in the back bedroom. She told me exactly what to say. I went to the doorway of the bedroom. My mother-in-law was pulling something from the top shelf of my husband's closet. A shoebox, old, the kind you put things in that you want to keep but don't want to look at. I need you to stop, I said. She looked at me with an expression that was designed, I think, to make me feel like a child. Sweetheart, she said, we're just trying to. I need you to leave everything where it is, I said, both of you. And I need you to leave the house. If you'd like to arrange a time to come back with an inventory list, you can contact my attorney. The man with the box looked at her. She looked at me. You don't understand what's at stake, she said. I think I'm starting to, I said. She left. The man left. The shoebox stayed on the shelf. I took it down after they were gone. Inside was what I can only describe as a second life. My husband had been living in the margins of our marriage. A lease agreement for an apartment downtown, signed 16 months ago. Bank statements for an account I had never seen. Photographs. Not many, maybe a dozen, of him and a woman I did not recognize, at restaurants and on trips, and once, unmistakably, in a kitchen that was not ours. The woman in the photographs was the one who had died with him on Route 211. I sat on the floor of my bedroom for a long time. Not crying. I had already done so much of that in the days since the accident that I had run up against some limit I hadn't known existed. Mostly I just sat there and kept revising the story I had been telling myself about my marriage. The cabin trip that was never a cabin trip, the route that went the wrong direction, the gravel road in the woods where he had left me without a car or keys or a signal, like a problem he'd decided to walk away from. He hadn't been going to get something from the trunk, he had been leaving. The second car, I later found out, had been parked a half-mile down the road. The woman had been waiting for him. The plan, as best as my attorney and I could reconstruct it, had been for him to walk down, get in the car, and be gone before I could reach anyone. He wasn't planning on dying. He was planning on leaving, collecting the insurance policy he had taken out on the apartment, and starting over. The accident on Route 211 happened because they were driving too fast and the road curved and the guardrail gave way. I have thought many times about the fact that I was standing on a gravel road trying to describe trees to a 911 operator while the plan that was supposed to erase me from his life was erasing him from it instead. My attorney and I spent 4 months in litigation. It was not clean or simple or satisfying in the way that stories about justice sometimes imply. There were depositions and counterfilings, and one particularly miserable afternoon where I sat across a conference table from my mother-in-law and her attorney and watched her cry on cue for 30 minutes while her attorney argued that I had been a distant and uninvested spouse. But the law was on my side. It was specifically, clearly, and unambiguously on my side. The elective share. The homestead protection. The documentation my attorney found showing that the updated will had been drafted at the same address as the downtown apartment by an attorney who also represented the woman in the photographs. A conflict my attorney described with professional restraint as notable. The house stayed mine. The filing cabinet came back from storage, legally compelled. Inside it were documents that took another 2 months to untangle. The other bank account, the apartment lease, evidence of the insurance policy that had been intended to fund his disappearance. His mother and I have not spoken since the conference table. I don't expect we will. The hardest thing to explain to people who ask how I'm doing. And people do ask, in the way that people ask when they want the short answer, not the real one, is that the grief is not simple. I grieve a marriage that I now know was not what I thought it was. I grieve the version of him I believed in. The one from the dinner table on Tuesday nights, who put his fork down and said he'd found a cabin. I grieve the relief I felt which turned out to be the cruelest part. The way my heart opened toward him in that moment. Grateful for something that was never real. But I do not grieve my own softness. I don't regret that I believed him, because I think believing the person you married is an act of faith that deserves to be honored, and the failure was his, not mine. What I keep instead is the moment in the doorway of my bedroom, looking at my mother-in-law with the shoebox still on the shelf behind her and saying what I said. Clearly, without apology. And the house that is still mine. And Terrell, who drove me to the station without asking a single question, who I later sent a letter to at the delivery company, thanking him for stopping on a road he'd turned down by accident. He wrote back. He said he had stopped because he knew, in the way you sometimes just know, that someone needed to not be alone. That part, I think, is also true of marriage, when it works. Someone needs to not be alone, and you stop. You choose, again and again, to stop. He forgot that, or maybe he never knew it. I do. I keep coming back to the shoebox. Not the filing cabinet, not the courthouse, not the 4 months of depositions. The shoebox on the top shelf of his closet, sitting there quietly for however long it had been sitting there, while I made dinner and paid half the mortgage and believed in a version of my life that wasn't quite real. There's something about that image that tells me everything I need to know about how things went wrong and how they eventually, slowly, went right. He hid things because somewhere in him he understood that what he was doing couldn't survive being seen. And I missed it not because I was naive, but because I was trusting, which is not the same thing, even though people like to confuse the two. Trust given freely to someone who has earned it is not a flaw. It becomes a flaw only when you keep giving it past the point where the evidence has changed. That's the part I've had to sit with. Not the betrayal itself, but the question underneath it. At what point does faith in someone become a way of avoiding what you already on some level know? I don't have a clean answer. I think I was somewhere in that uncomfortable middle, not fully blind, not fully awake. And I think a lot of people live there longer than they mean to. What pulled me out of it wasn't some dramatic moment of clarity. It was practical necessity. I needed an attorney. I needed to understand what my rights were. And the act of finding out, of sitting across from Vasquez and learning that the law actually protected me, that I had not been simply erased by a document signed in an apartment I'd never been to. That act of going to find out instead of waiting to be told changed something in me that I don't think will change back. My mother-in-law was counting on me not knowing. That's the part I think about the most. The whole strategy, the filed cabinet, the emergency contact, the will. It only worked if I stayed uninformed and overwhelmed and too grief-stricken to ask questions. The moment I started asking questions, the whole architecture of it began to come apart. There's a kind of strength that doesn't look like strength at all from the outside. It looks like making phone calls. It looks like sitting in an attorney's office and saying, "I don't know, tell me." It looks like standing in a doorway and saying what you mean clearly, without raising your voice and then waiting. Terrell didn't have to stop his truck on that gravel road. He stopped because he decided to. That's what I think about when things feel overwhelming. That decency and steadiness are always a choice someone is making, and that the choice is available to me too. I'm still in the house. The kitchen renovation never happened, and I'm not sure it will for a while, and that's fine. Some mornings I make coffee and stand at the counter and look at the yard and I feel something that isn't quite peace, but is in the neighborhood of it. A kind of clarity that comes from knowing, finally, exactly where you stand and what is yours. He forgot that a marriage is made of choices, repeated daily, to stay present and honest. I didn't forget. And in the end, that's what I kept.